And there's one dietitian that changed my life by changing my relationship with food. She did this test for me, which I do now for my clients. It's called food sensitivity and intolerances, from which I've developed a different approach to my fuel and the foods that I put inside of me.
If you
And
get
that is
told on the same day that you can't have coffee, bread, and butter, you can't be French.
no, but you'll notice it's not very often, but like the people that I diagnose with, you know what they reply when they hear that? They're like, I knew it.
Really?
They feel it. It doesn't make them feel good.
Since we're talking about flying,
Yeah.
what does a professional longevity dietitian eat when you fly on such a long distance? I'm really curious because plain food, not the greatest. What do you do?
So my special recommendations, I always travel with my snacks and foods, and I make sure all of them are high quality and high protein, because that's what usually you don't get enough of.
Ella, I'm delighted to have you on the show today, and especially knowing that you just got back from Switzerland and took a flight overnight and just arrived in Miami. What a huge effort to show up today for the podcast. I'm really grateful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was quite a trip. I attended World Economic Forum in Davos and just got back last night, and I'm so excited to be here with you.
Oh, how was that? How was the forum?
It was my first time. It was intense. It was a lot, and I was there. I stayed for a little ski adventure afterwards, coming from Miami to Switzerland. I decided to combine pleasure with business. And yeah, it was just absolutely incredible. I was on a mission to build strategic partnerships for Global Longevity Association, and I absolutely loved meeting incredible people from all over the world.
That is incredible. Actually, that brings me on straight to a question that I can't wait to ask since we're talking about flying.
Yeah.
What does a professional longevity dietitian eat when you fly on such a long distance? I'm really curious because plain food, not the greatest. What do you do?
So great question. Yeah. So my special recommendations, I always travel with my snacks and foods, and I make sure all of them are high quality and high protein, because that's what usually you don't get enough of. Airline snacks and airline food is notoriously low in protein. And this is what's essential for our hormone balancing and for our overall metabolic health. So I always make sure to bring like dried cured meats, like jerkies. I have them like highest quality, like deer venison or chicken or turkey. I absolutely love snacking on those. Sometimes if it's a short flight, but it's not international, I bring my own salads because, like here in the United States, we are very lucky to have like salad access to like in the larger cities. And then, yeah, other snacks, like I bring bags of herbal teas instead of drinking their poor quality black coffee. I don't like doing that. It's too acidic for me. And yeah, I recommend to my clients either bring your own food, high protein snacks, or bring your own hydration.
I have to say, Ella, you had me at dry venison. We became instant best friends.
Right.
I'm a huge carnivore and I love primal diet. So anything that is, venison or dry beef, dry
Yeah.
meat in general, I'm a huge fan. It's so convenient and it's so easy to fall into the trap of your usual biscuits and highly processed cereal. And actually, it's so easy to pack really high protein, really high quality food
Yeah.
with you.
And that's what happens. You said like the biscuits and the foods, like that's what happens when we're not thinking for ourselves. We become the product of the environment. You think a lot of people think like, oh, everyone else is eating that. Like, how am I different? Like, it's just like it's an environmental conditions. But in reality, once you take responsibility, it's a whole different approach. You're very proactive about the things that you do and the things that you bring on the plate. You realize this whole environment is set against you. It's set for you to become sick and disease ridden. So it's just not you realize how hard it is actually when you are very mindful of the choices and what's best for you. And then you pick and choose and you find the solutions. And you realize like it becomes a new way of being. And what I love teaching my clients is that once you figure out for yourself, you become a role model for everyone else. I love that feeling when my clients finally step out of this mindset, like, oh, it's hard, I'm doing this for myself, everyone's like doing things differently. But then when people turn to them and be like, I'll have what she's having, what is it that you're doing, I'm learning. And then you become a role model for your community, and everyone else starts learning from you. That's, I think, is the goal of this whole thing.
Absolutely. And I love that we dive into this conversation because a lot of my clients are what I call high-billers, high flyers. They're constantly traveling around the world. They're working at a really, really intense space, multiple time zone, working in multiple jurisdiction. And one thing that they always say to me is, oh, I feel bloated, I feel jet lagged, I feel exhausted. And I travel a lot as well, but I really believe that the way you eat and how you hydrate and the way you prepare your nutrition when you travel plays such a huge part. I know I can see you hydrating right now. And I think we underestimate that. We're quite quick to blame the travels and the plane. But I think if we take a bit more self responsibility into the things we have control over, like
Right.
no one actually forced you to eat that biscuit.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, it takes a proactive approach to avoid this and to have something else, because I was hungry. I was on the flight for 11 hours and you give me all these like carb loaded snacks. And I was like, I have nothing else. I would just eat that. Right. But when you do have something else, like I had an apple in my bag, I also had the jerky. Right. I was, it was, we are hungry. Some people just choose to fast throughout the whole thing, which is one way of doing this. But another way is to be very proactive, is to thinking ahead. And there's a saying, if you fail to prepare, prepare to fail.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And I love your point of view as well on intermittent fasting. I know that you've covered that and you've done a lot of self experimentation and you found this sweet spot whereby a little bit of fasting can do some good because it doesn't increase your stress level, but too much intermittent fasting can put you in a high stress zone. I've noticed the same for myself. So I would love if we could expand on that a little bit.
It's really so intermittent fasting is the cheapest and most effective way to create the difference in your metabolic health, right? But you have to build it up. Build it up to the point where you're using it as a tool, and there's the risk benefit analysis that you just mentioned, that instead, like if you're surrounded by your family and they're cooking and you're just sitting there looking at the clock counting hours, that's just counterproductive. And if you're overly hungry, so for women especially, there's a hormone cycle that we need to take into account. But just in generally speaking, my recommendation is to take advantage of metabolic enhancements that fasting can offer us, is to build on overnight fasting. For example, we sleep let's say 11 to 6 a.m., right? Or I usually sleep like 10 to 7. And last night I got in, it was already 6 o'clock. So I recommend people to avoid late night eating 3 to 4 hours before going to sleep. And for me, to beat the jet lag and to be my high performing self this morning, I chose to avoid dinner last night. And that's what made me wake up full of energy, hungry, with flat stomach, and wanting to take over the day, even though I slept for like 9 hours. So that's what I recommend my clients to do, to front load your day with calories and to avoid eating late at night. So not only that you build up a fasting window, since you're sleeping for like 7 to 8 hours, and you build up of avoiding either late night eating or sometimes early morning. This works differently for many different people. So creating that window of at least minimum of 12 hours window of fasting creates an opportunity for you to reap the benefits. And there's so many benefits. Autophagy is one of them. Getting rid of the zombie cells when your body it's called like a healthy stress, when your body is not digesting and it's utilizing its own fuel for energy. And that's when our bodies regenerates itself, getting rid of the weak cells and only the strong ones are staying. And that's just the easiest way, especially for women and those who travel and all over the place. But then once you master that, the next thing is to build up on that, like making up to 14 or 16 hours of fasting. So really avoiding late night eating. And I see a lot of models and people who are into biohacking, they just stop eating after 5 or 6 p.m. So avoid dinner altogether, or a dinner fasting up to 24 hours once a week or once a month. that's what I recommend as a good start.
I love those modalities. I've experienced with longer as well, but what I find is that only works for me if I'm not navigating a period of heightened
Yes.
anxiety. I find that it can actually make me feel more stressed if I'm already quite
For
stressed.
women,
So,
it's only the first 2 week
right.
of the cycle. Yeah, the first 2 week, the menstrual, and the one after it, right before ovulation. The two other one, the ovulation and luteal phase, is not good for fasting, but it is good for like overnight fasting as well as like a high protein, high fat diet.
Hmm. And Ella, I'm really curious. I was wondering if you could tell us more about your transition, because I know you had a previous career on Wall Street and now you've become a longevity dietitian. Can you tell us more about how you've made that transition and what compelled you to work in the field of nutrition and food? And I would love to know the link between the two.
It was quite a transition. But before I even mention that, I'll tell you my pre-story. I grew up in the suburbs in Russia. So I was raised very close to nature. We and my grandparents and my parents would raise their own food and animals and produce for us, for our family, to be sufficient and self-sufficient on homegrown produce throughout the year. So I grew up very in touch with natural way of living. And to this day, like I always teach my clients to choose farm grown produce, and I always tell them like it's better than organic. That organic is just another label, especially here in the U.S. where regulations are just so lax. So, but when I moved to the United States, when I became as a young woman, when I became 19, as a young immigrant in New York, where do you go to make a living? Of course, I ended up on Wall Street, and I'm very smart and fast, and math comes easy to me. So I got my bachelor's in finance, and find myself working at UBS, United Bank of Switzerland. I was very young. I was 23 years old. It was all about me stepping into my can I do this, And then next thing I know, I'm working in this huge office on Park Avenue with floor to ceiling glass windows, right? And I was like, wow, I'm a big deal. But at that time, I was really struggling with my health and what stress would do to me. I felt bloated. I felt a low energy. I struggled to lose weight, but in reality, it was like my mindset. It's like a high anxiety mindset where I was size 2, but I wanted to be size 0. I was very hard on myself, like exercising every day, training every day. And I had a lot of skin issues. I went to every doctor, dermatologist, like all the money that I would earn, I would give it all away to all these creams, all these doctors, treatments. I was trying to find answers. Why am I not feeling my 100%? And there's one dietitian that changed my life by changing my relationship with food. She did this test for me, which I do now for my clients. It's called food sensitivity and intolerances, from which I've developed a different approach to my fuel and the foods that I put inside of me. By that time, I've already tried every diet. I was vegan, pescatarian, vegetarian, Ayurvedic, another macrobiotic diets, so many different approaches. And its only personalized approach helped me to bridge my mind and my body. So as I like to say, it was no longer, the information from somewhere outside. Someone said that, I heard that, I read that. It was all from me, from my own body. And that's what I teach my clients, to just finally connect your mind and your body. And with that, I realized I want to make a career out of it. I started studying yoga. Yoga saved my life from anxious mind. And I became a health coach. And then eventually, to make a career out of it, I got a medical degree from NYU in clinical nutrition and medical nutrition therapy. Did a whole residency, got my license. And since then, it's been quite a journey. I teach others just like me to figure out what it is that their body needs and what kind of fuel their body thrives on.
And you know what I love about your story is I heard your interview where you referred to the difference of your work as an inpatient resident and as an outpatient proactive coach and dietitian, and how the difference the difference that you notice on how in the hospital very often we cure patients, right? We're trying to help them to alleviate symptoms, and it's a very reactive philosophy, whereas what you do now is much more proactive before the person is getting sick, right?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
can you tell us more about those two different approaches, which is really at the heart and soul of function of medicine? And I would love to hear more about that.
Well, yeah, my mind moves incredibly fast, So when I see a problem, I'm trying to figure out a solution. And in hospital settings, you're not trained to do that, and nobody wants you to do that. So you're basically working with people that are in the negative state, and your job is to bring them to neutral, to like zero, so they don't have symptoms and they can go home and they can continue doing what they're doing. And this is why people in hospitals, no one goes to the hospital to uh, become an ultra man or ultra marathon runner, like to become from like 0 to plus 100, right? And that's when I realized, and also in hospital settings, when the way I was trained, they were like, we don't get to spend more than 8 minutes with one patient. All you could do is to soothe them, and hospital food is only designed to soothe people and comfort them and get them from negative to zero so they can go home without pain and without symptoms, And then my job is, with my background, was all about figuring out how can I, if I'm already feeling at neutral, not my best, not necessarily with chronic disease, how can I prevent this from happening, prevent this from ever getting down to negative? That's how I found myself in longevity. I got a lot of certification in integrative nutrition, functional nutrition, longevity medicine, and optimization of metabolic health. And I love that these are my clients. These are the people that come to me that are just like me, that are interested, that they're smart. They're doing everything by the book, right? They figured out the healthy eating, the dieting, they supplement, but they still find themselves spinning their wheels. This is what I used to be like. And this is the type of clients that come to me. They already know all the basics, most of the basics. Sometimes they're surprised they thought differently. And that's when they come to me. So I could tweak a few things. We could do a couple of testing, whether it's gut health or blood sugar management or food sensitivities and intolerance. And with that, they're able to fly and to never dip down to the negative state.
What are the most common food sensitivities and intolerances that you see amongst your clients?
Yeah, most common is obviously gluten and dairy. Those are the most triggering, especially in the United States, where gluten is treated differently. So that's what people are noticing. When they go to Europe, they don't feel as triggered. One of the common symptom from gluten sensitivity is fatigue right after eating. You just feel sleepy. You feel like sluggish and brain fog. And dairy is number two. Is that dairy is actually international. 75% of overall world population is unable to or losing ability to digest dairy as they get older. So there's a special enzymes lactase that's being released to be able to digest the dairy proteins and sugars, and a lot of people do lose that ability. And so some of the symptoms are mucus formation, snoring, and earache, like ear infections, and skin issues. Those are the issues with dairy proteins.
So would that be one of your first steps when working with a new patient to
Yeah.
establish their food profile, sensitivities, and intolerances?
Yes, that's one of the first steps. In my book, I covered, and in my TED talk, I think I mentioned, like even before coming to me, most people already know their food sensitivities because it's a golden standard approach. It's called elimination diet, just to eliminate these foods, dairy containing products, and cow's dairy. I have to address the cows versus goats. And once you eliminate it for 21 days, you really feel the difference,
Mhm.
Some of my clients, they stop snoring. And then after that, they reintroduce dairy foods, which creates like congestion and mucus formation. And that's when they wake up one morning is like with dry mouth. And like, I was snoring. I couldn't breathe all night. I haven't felt that in 3 weeks. So it really triggers you and really the understanding, without the testing. So you get all the answers from your body. And there's different ways to prevent this. So that let's address the fact that once people have to like remove some of their favorite foods, like bread and butter, that's what we're talking about here, right? And you're removing those foods. What do you eat, right? So gluten-free breads and cereals and baked goods are amazing. Anything that's made with buckwheat, gluten-free oats, rice, and quinoa is amazing. And when it comes to dairy, I'm very careful when I eliminate it, because there's so many health benefits to dairy, like the healthy fats, butyric acid, probiotics when it comes to fermented dairy. So when we do eliminate it, we number one try to eliminate conventional dairy and substitute it with farm-raised dairy. So that also creates huge difference in some people. For some, it's still triggering. So we eliminate all cow's dairy and we substitute it with sheep and goat's dairy. So you could still have goat's yogurt, goat's milk, kefir, but and cheeses made of sheep and goat's milk, which creates huge difference because there's some completely different structure of proteins and they're less inflammatory for a lot of people, including myself. And the last thing that we could still have is ghee, Ghee.
Yeah.
It's
Had a lot of that in India.
yeah, it's made of cow's milk, but because it's clarified butter, it's 100% fat. It's got no proteins of cow's protein, casein, and whey. So it's absolutely safe to have. So we make sure to leave that. And just that alone, that cleanup creates huge difference. Other food sensitivities, there's a lot of them. There's soy, there's eggs, there's fish. And the test that I do is very advanced. Very often I diagnose people with caffeine intolerance and coffee beans. And
That's a tough one. If you get told on the same day that you can't have coffee, bread, and butter, you can't be French.
No, but you'll notice it's not very often, but like the people that I diagnose with, what they reply when they hear that? They're like, I knew it.
Really?
They feel it. It doesn't make them feel good. And then I've diagnosed people with sugar intolerance. Those are the people that have been struggling for years with obesity. And then there's little ones like celery, bananas, but those are very personally triggering, less common. But the most common one are definitely grains, shellfish, and eggs and soy, in addition to gluten and dairy.
And I think it's so important to mention the importance of doing those tests because very often we see a lot of controversy on socials around dairy. And, I'm quite passionate about this topic because I know that I can tolerate dairy very well, but I also know that it's a personal journey. And I think a lot of information and guidelines around dairy is really good if addressed to people that have taken that test and they all know their own personal journeys and their own sensitivities, but some of the things can't be applicable to everybody. So it's having your own food diary as well and doing some experiment. I love to record and track what I eat and how I feel. And I've done that for a few years to readjust and calibrate and eliminate some things. And I find that very empowering, actually. And sourdough and good French butter are some of my staple items. So.
Of course, as they should be. They're just not. Another thing is, like, for example, I was just in Switzerland. I ate a lot of dairy, even though, like, in my dietary intake, I enjoy everything I eat, even though, like, my house is sugar-free and gluten-free and it's dairy-free. But when I travel, and that's what I recommend to my clients, like, life happens, So one of the solutions is that as soon as I landed home yesterday, what I took with me is enzymes. Is to support your body to digest those foods that you're unable. So I took comprehensive enzymes in the last few days when I was overindulging in Switzerland.
Did you ever take prebiotics as well?
Only when I travel. Every day I recommend eating probiotic foods and prebiotic containing foods. I think I should mention that. So probiotics is everything that's fermented, like kimchi, fermented pickles and cucumbers and beets and carrots. And all of the fermented vegetables are an incredible source of live bacteria, as well as dairy. As I mentioned earlier, cows, goats, and sheep's milk yogurts are a staple at my house. Love adding them to yogurts or to like breakfast and smoothies. In addition to that, kombucha, which is fermented tea. And prebiotics are actually the fuel for probiotics. And those are fiber foods that are hard to chew, things like celery, artichokes, onions, leeks. And I always make sure that like green leafy salads, all of those foods are essential because they get to ferment in our gut and they provide the fuel for probiotics to thrive on.
Thank you for explaining this. I also like to take prebiotics when I travel, and I take them quite frequently. And I find that it just really helps me to adjust to the new place I'm going to and a slightly different diet as well. So,
Yes,
um,
definitely. Because I feel like when we travel, most of us less differently than we eat at home. And the common thing is that we eat less vegetables because most restaurants are not focused on providing high fiber meals. Even like, yeah, this is a huge protein option, maybe, and like a smaller fiber option next to it.
So I know that you wrote an article about what to eat when you eat out. And that's something that I would love to dive into because I think it's really important to address the point that, most of our clients do have a very busy social life. They entertain clients, they go to networking events, they go to client meetings that are followed by dinners. And a lot of the time my clients turn around and say, it's really hard not to be drinking with my clients, to
And
be making empowering decision when I'm at the dinner table because there is a bit of peer pressure and I don't want to seem like a fussy eater in front of my client. And I also love to entertain and be a bon vivant and all of that. So what would you say to high flying professionals that do have a lot of this networking? How can they make empowering decisions?
great choice. So that's why I started hosting. I started hosting longevity dinners to educate people on how you could still have fun and network and connect with people and have business meetings and still feel like a champion the next day, right? Without sacrificing. So number one, I always recommend ordering either a bone broth based soup for appetizer or a vegetarian high fiber appetizer. That's a great start to stabilize your blood sugar, to make sure you're eating enough fiber and bone broth based. What I say is that not the cream based, because the cream based is usually heavier and it's just like overall less nutrient dense. So if you can find that on the menu, that's usually a great start. And when it comes to like high fiber, I recommend things like lentil, beans, avocados, edamame, or green like tricolore salads. Like the more vegetables, the better. For main course, I always recommend choosing high protein dish, whether it's fish, chicken, duck, or steak, or any of like the proteins, 3 to 4 ounces, like the size of your palm. So the more protein you have and fiber at the one meal, the more chances that you'll feel better the next day because proteins and fiber help to stabilize your insulin and stabilized insulin helps us with metabolic rate. It helps us to prevent early signs of aging, right? When we are helping our insulin to stay stable without the huge spikes. So the huge spikes are coming from carb loaded meals. For example, eating a basket of bread on an empty stomach. That's one way to damage your metabolism because it sends your insulin through the roof. And to avoid that, I recommend either my whole thing is either avoiding bread if it's not like freshly made, warm, like I'm very like a snob when it comes to bread because I love a good bread. And if I'm sacrificing something, it has to be very special. So really become a qualitarian, as I call it, If it's something special, freshly made, yes, make sure to eat it with butter, at least some healthy fats, or wait until an appetizer and eat it together, right? But really starting your meal with proteins and fiber is ideal. In an ideal world, this is how we should be doing it, right? And choose your carb. I recommend my clients choosing one carb per meal. It's either bread or it's pasta for main course, right? Or it's a dessert. You got to choose one, So I usually tend to avoid bread, especially if it's like fresh or anything, or avoid pasta. But I say yes to dessert. If you don't have a sweet tooth, because ideally you should have carbs after proteins and fiber. So my pyramid is like that: it's fiber for appetizer, protein and fiber for main course, and then carbohydrates after it. If you're someone who loves pasta or bread, make sure to avoid dessert and make sure to combine the intake of this, the fiber and protein. So my saying is, I teach my clients so they come to the dinner. They don't even open the menu. They just communicate with the waitress and say, what vegetarian starters, like what do you have for starters? And you choose something maybe, that has a lot of vegetables. And then for main course, you think, like if you had a steak last night and you had a chicken the night before, you realize you haven't had omega-3 fish in a long time. So you ask them, what kind of omega-3 rich fish do you have? Do you have salmon? Do you have trout? Do you have sardines, mackerel? And when they say yes someday, like you should be going with that, because diversity and variety of nutrients is very important. And that's what supplements are designed for, to supplement our diet, right? Instead of taking omega-3 supplement, you should make sure that you're eating omega-3 rich fish at least 3 to 4 times a week. So that, yeah, with that, that's what I recommend. And the go-to saying here, just to memorize, is protein and fiber at every meal makes losing weight no big deal. That's what I want you're ordering.
I love it. I'm a huge fan of raw carrot salad. I like to do it homemade with extra virgin olive oil. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. I think that there's some huge benefit to having your fibers, and it kind of settles your stomach as well a little bit. I love bone broth as well. I make it at home in a slow cooker. I always ask my butcher. I'm looking at very nice
plate that's on my website. This is like a plate when you grab a plate at the buffet, right? And you're walking down the aisle, it's like, what should I put on it? And the first, like half of your plate should be colorful vegetables, mostly non-starchy vegetables, like green and colorful, and then starchy, which are mostly white, a little bit less. And then there's proteins, fat, and antioxidants, like herbs, spices, and some berries, and sometimes a little bit of some fruit. That's what creates a longevity plate, especially if it's not in one meal, but at least by the end of the day, that should be the buildup. That's what you should be consuming in one day. And if you notice, like most people, I call them like they hang out from like 5 to 7 p.m., like from here, because it's the most delicious. It's just starch, carbs, and protein. So most people are here. They just eat like here, but they're missing out on all of this. And that's what creates a huge balance.
What do you think about slight nuances around choosing something with vegetables for a starter, especially if that starter is deep fried? So the reason I'm mentioning that is I recently had lunch with a client who was ordering some deep fried vegetable dumplings for starter, and really deep fried food gives me huge anxiety, and I can't help but feel a bit nervous about PUFAs and fried seed oils. And personally, I would never choose that starter. I would always choose like mackerel or smoked salmon over nice creme fraiche or salmon roes, anything but fried food. And I think sometimes we can lose track that not all vegetarian food and not all vegetables are good if they're poorly cooked or if they're deep fried. I would love your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. My recommendation is to avoid everything that says crunchy or fried. That means it's deeply fried for sure. Try to avoid that as much as possible. I like to recommend raw food for lunch and cooked or temperature treated for dinner. And sometimes I order a side dish for an appetizer just because you want to have those amazing vegetables. But sometimes appetizers have too many ingredients that I'd rather avoid. So yeah, vegetarian appetizer. It's okay to order protein-based appetizers like hamachi or like salmon tartare, right? But I prefer the cleanest. The cleanest, the better. The more. That's why my go-to recommendations are Greek restaurants, because with them it's very easy. It's like what you see is what you got, like there's no double guessing what's in here. It's a lot of ingredients, which is fine. It's fun sometimes, but like simple Mediterranean cooking is what I teach my clients to order. Sometimes when you're at a restaurant, it's just like too much, like this butter, this bacon on my broccoli, and then you look at the waiter and you just tell them, can I have my broccoli or my Swiss chard Mediterranean style, just simply olive oil and garlic, that's it. And you make it like you smile and you say please, and they usually do it. Even if it's not on the menu, they bring it for you. My go-to for desserts as well, when I'm sitting at some like American steakhouses, they're just like notorious with bad desserts. Their desserts just like, they don't even taste good. They're just like, so I always ask for bowl of berries. Very often, they don't have that on the menu. So what I make sure is that I ask them to make it for me. And they do. They very often do.
Oh, that's good. Yes, berries are amazing. Yeah. I was wondering if we could also dive into your thoughts around how we eat. so not necessarily what we eat, but how we eat. And specifically here, I'm thinking about plastic containers and putting our food in microwaves that are surrounded by plastic. And then that plastic gets heated up and there is microplastic in our food. And then we carry our cups of coffees that is contained with microplastic. What are your thoughts around that as a longevity dietitian? I would love your input.
Yes, aluminum and plastics containers I try to avoid, especially plastic because it's everywhere and it's one of the worst things because it does leach out some of the harmful chemicals into our food when it's heated. So plastic bottles and plastic containers and plastic wraps, I try to make sure to avoid those as much as possible. And even when I do, like for food, make sure you don't use it for heating, right? You take your food on the plate and that's how you heat it up. Ideally, most of my containers are glass. They're made of glass. When I used to take lunch to work, I would use glass containers and silicone caps. Now there's so much research, so much science behind, like they're finding microplastics in brains and organs of children, and all of that gets leached from adults. And again, we just, plastic became as a convenience for the humanity, not because of the health of the humanity. It's super convenient and it's everywhere and it's hard to avoid right now, but more and more people are carrying like reusable bottles and glass water bottles, and that's ideal. In the long run, that's ideal. So we're coming back to more traditional uses. Like I use a huge water filter at my house instead of lugging these huge water bottles, containing plastic. So that's the worst thing to do, for yourself, is to just be completely negligible, especially for children. Like a lot of people are using still plastic containers to heat up the food, and so avoid that as much as possible. And same thing for aluminum, actually, especially in America, very popular that people wrap their food in aluminum and cook on it. So I try to avoid that. Aluminum is still heavy metal, and we test for that in our blood, and we want to make sure that it's not there. We try to avoid that. Aluminum containers of a canned food, because sometimes I recommend like mackerel, sardines, and anchovies. That's fine. That's not if it's not heated. But even that, right now, there's a special lining that they provide, so the aluminum itself does not touch the food because it does, leach into our food.
And so, what do you replace aluminum with for cooking? So, for example,
I
if
just put a
you're
parchment paper in between.
right, okay.
And I wrap my food like that, so make sure that only the paper touches the food. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just easy little hacks. I recently went through my kitchen and did a bit of plastic elimination, and I was shocked by the amount of plasticky things I had. I didn't realize even, the utensil you use to flip over your egg or things like that. Why not buy wooden ones? Or, it's just such a simple switch. And I have to admit, I was guilty of having some of them being plastic, and then I realized it was leaching and just had to go through eliminating everything. But yes, it takes a bit of
Yeah, I was lucky. I grew up in Russia, and my father's a chemist. So he
Oh,
taught me
wow.
very early on to avoid microwaving and plastics. Like he knew it, and I thought he's just like he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like he's not catching up with the science. Like the microwave and plastics are everywhere, and he still talks like he's in the 70s. But nowadays, I mean, I've never gotten used to it. Like I never use microwave. I use it as a storage at my house. I try, and like the plastic itself, it was just what plastic is made of, right? It's made out of the oil, which comes out of Russia a lot. And that's why I always knew that. Like, there's nothing healthy about plastic. Like it's convenient, yes, it's super easy to use, but I always knew like it's not the best, like the healthiest option, if you were to say so. Yeah.
Oh, good. So you didn't have to go through the pain of having to buy everything new again and putting everything in the trash.
When the science, caught up with it, I was like, oh yeah, I never like gotten used to it. Yes, I like the plastic wraps. They're super convenient, right? But again, if you don't heat it up, don't be so hard on yourself. Like it just itself, it's fine. But but the problem with water, especially if like during the summer, it all gets heated up, whether you want it or not.
And I often get that question around planning, because a lot of my clients are really, really busy professionals. They have extremely demanding schedule. They have busy family lives as well. And what they find most challenging to navigate with their nutritional journey is how to eat well when we're so busy. And I'm sure you hear this every day, but a lot of my clients, they stress snack, they reach out for a cookie when they're overwhelmed, they reach out for the crisps when they're tired. How do you overcome that? What would be your advice to help those really, really busy folks optimize the way they eat day to day?
Number one is food shopping. If you surround yourself with healthy foods, you end up eating healthy foods. Especially if I teach my clients in America here, healthy produce here is it's more expensive, right? And I was like, you've already invested into this. Now your job is to make sure you eat it and to cook it, right? Sometimes it works for some people. So then you got to learn new techniques. Cooking for high performers is the name of my book. I cook all of my foods from scratch. That's just how I grew up. And it's not more than 15 minutes each recipe, because I tell people, like, if I were to cook like 3 meals a day and it would take me more than 15 minutes, I'll be in the kitchen all day. I don't want to do that. I have a lot on my plate. I travel a lot and all the time. So like really finding a way, falling in love with simple recipes and simple flavors is definitely something that would help you to improve your taste buds, because you'll be surprised. A lot of people that I work with, they're like, I don't like cauliflower, I don't like celery, I don't like vegetables, but it's because their taste buds are oversaturated with these strong flavors of like salty foods or sugary foods. And once they detox from sugar, caffeine and alcohol, and then sometimes it's gluten and dairy, you'll realize their taste bud change. You have no idea how many clients I've had that would just come to me and be like, I'm a bank CEO, I go into these meetings in the afternoon, I have to have my cookies to be able to have the energy for all these people that are just sitting there looking at me. And the same guy comes to me like 2 weeks after, and he's like, you know what? Raspberries doing it just fine for me. And I'll be like, wow. And the same things like women that like would hate cauliflower, but drink sugar sweetened beverages. And once they remove them, they're like, you know what? I didn't know. It's not that bad. It's actually not that bad. So yes, changing your food habits and surrounding yourself with health foods. And when it comes to snacking, I really am like, I'm going to repeat myself again, but like focus on each meal containing proteins and fiber at every meal. Because if you don't eat enough fiber for lunch, guess what? 2 hours later, you want to be snacking. Same thing for breakfast. If you choose oats versus eggs for breakfast, 2 hours later, you're hungry and you want to be snacking. It's the high carbohydrate foods and not enough of protein per meal. That's what creates this constant hunger afterwards. My goal for my clients is that I always teach them is that if you eat 3 to 4 ounces of protein per meal and 2 handfuls of fiber per meal, the goal is that you forget about food for the next 4 to 5 hours. And if that didn't happen, that means you didn't do something the meal before. Okay. And that's what you should be focusing on. Like, I know that in myself too. Like, if I didn't eat enough protein, it was just like a huge salad and a little bit of protein. Sometimes that happens. Then you want to be snacking. You're always looking for something else. But in the ideal world, that's what you want to balance.
I love that you said that. And I love that you mentioned the palate changing as well. I am especially passionate about offcuts and offals and eating nose to tail. And a lot of my clients get a bit grossed out when I mention, eating liver or eating heart. They say it tastes really horrible. But actually, I know in Russia, it's you guys eat a lot of organ meat as well. So
now worldwide, now Americans are catching up with the science. Organ meats are multivitamins of the nature, especially liver. Organ meats have zero fats. That means they're low in cholesterol. They're high in protein. They're hugely affordable and sustainable, right? Because
very
we're not
sustainable.
going half of the animal and just eating like some parts of it, right? Yeah, sustainable and affordable. It's not expensive. Organ meats are like fraction of a price compared to just the proteins, like the muscle proteins. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for proteins, for organ meats. So sorry.
I love that you said that. I was currently looking over there because I have 2 beef cheeks cooking up for dinner tonight. That's my meal. And they're amazing, so rich in collagen. You throw a couple of carrots in there, put a few onions, and you let it slow cook for a few hours. Really good flake salt, and it tastes delicious. Tastes like a chef invited you for dinner, even though you had pretty much nothing to
You're
do. So
kidding me. I don't think I cook beef cheeks. I don't even know where
they're
to look
so good. They're
for that.
really, really good. And then if you really want to go the extra mile and make it super special, you
Yeah.
get them out of the juice, you dry them out, and you throw them on a really hot pan with butter. So you make the outside crispy
Yeah.
and the inside melts. So you've got this layer of crispy, delicious, buttery salt. And the
Yeah.
inside is this like really soft collagen
I
beef.
love everything you just said. Yes, bone broth, like bones also for collagen are essential. One of my recommendations. But let me quickly address, I don't know if you have listeners who are afraid of animal protein, especially like big animals, because they're afraid of cholesterol, right? And there's so much controversy right now where they say like should be eating less meat, right, for sustainability. I want to quickly address that and say if you have cholesterol problems, while you're eating all the foods that we just mentioned, that means you're not eating enough fiber. Fiber is not only great for your gut microbiome, it's also great for removing the LDL cholesterol. It binds to LDL cholesterol. It helps to detoxify, and eating enough fiber at every meal is key. And if you have problem with cholesterol, sure, you can remove all red meat from your diet. That's one way. But another way is to add all the healthy fiber. And I recommend smoothies, like smoothies, and add your vegetables to smoothies if you're not eating enough vegetables for breakfast, as well as all the vegetables that I mentioned like before. Like I eat side dishes, side vegetables for an appetizer, right? And that's what you should always buy. Fiber, that's what I mean. All types of colorful green leaf vegetables as well as grains. So some
I
people
love that you mentioned that so much. When traditionally in French recipes, you always have meat with fibers, but I think we've lost track of traditional ancestral food. And now, we're so quick to blame the meat, but actually we just make a couple of adjustments and meat is really good for you. So yeah, I'm glad you've said that.
Absolutely. I'm a huge advocate for proteins and fibers because I do gut microbiome testing. And with that, I see all the science and all the difference that our fibers are doing to our gut. Thrives on fiber. It needs that. But our body, our hormones, our muscle mass to prevent fragility and to become fragile. And when we get older, we need to eat enough protein. So those two are essential. So that's why you see a lot of longevity people who are just talking about protein, and then you hear all the wellness advocates just talking about vegetables, right? The vegan versus carnivore versus like me, someone who has a clinical background in nutrition and does a lot of testing on people and sees what really creates a difference. It's both. You can take one or another.
I love that. Thank you so much for bringing your insights to the podcast. And I can't wait to meet you in person in Miami. And I'll be sure to put your TEDx and your books and your Instagram page on the show notes. So,
Now, let
Ella,
me just
thank you so
quickly
much.
address the Cooking for Performance is just a collection of recipes, but this book is called You-Tarian. That is what I mentioned earlier, is the trademark that I've created. The book, which is all about like different testing and fundamentals of nutrition that everyone should learn to be able to figure out what it is, which dietary nutrition approach works for them. Instead of being flexitarian, pescatarian, vegetarian, become a You-Tarian. Find this peace and power inside of you to just do the right thing for you and stop caring about what everyone else is doing, And that's, I think, everything like in the decade that I worked with clients, everything is in this book. This book originally was just created for my clients. It was just like a handout at the end of the session, at the end of the program, and I made it available. It's on Amazon and delivered worldwide.
Thank you, Ella. I'm so grateful and I can't wait to see you again. Take care.
Hello,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
Thank you for spending your time with me today and listening to this episode. Remember to subscribe so that you can receive weekly updates. And if today's message resonated with you, please remember to share it with a friend, a colleague, or a loved one who could really benefit from this episode.